I'm not quite sure what the right term is. Anyway, so this is 152, incident response. And last week we didn't have one because of the job fair, which seemed like a big success for a lot of people with jobs and a lot of students. So I think that was a good thing to do. So now we're on chapter 3, pre-incident preparation. So let me get that up. All right, whoops. There we go. That'll do. All right, so when you have an incident, there are certain obvious things you have to do, like how did somebody get in? What did they do? Are they still in there? What information was stolen? You know, these are the things you're trying to figure out. How should we remediate the situation? The first thing you do is short-term repair. How do we stop the current attack in progress and stop any more data from being stolen right now? And then, in the long run, how do we improve our security so attackers with this skill level can no longer get in? So, you can prepare the organization, the team, or the infrastructure. And to prepare the organization, you've got challenges, right? Deciding what policies would promote your successful IR and other things like education. We'll talk about these. So identifying risk. This is the typical thing you do. There are various ways you can decide what risks are. One common way is to start from your assets. Here's our valuable things, and we should talk about what might threaten them. So you've got your reputation, you've got your business confidential data, your personal identifiable information of your customers and employees, your payment account data, things like that. You've got exposures. These are areas of your company that are vulnerable in some way, like unpatched systems, things that are connected to the internet, and of course your employees who might make mistakes or indeed deliberately sabotage things if they get unhappy. There are threat actors. These are people who might do bad things to you. Anybody on the internet that doesn't like you, or people that can physically get in the building or into the secure areas in the building, for example. Those are some categories of possible threat actors, and you can analyze your security from any of these viewpoints. So there's a lot of policies which, if you have them, make it more likely that you can successfully respond to an incident, such as if you have acceptable use policies limiting what people can do at your machines, like they're not allowed to bring in software from home and install it on their machine, security policies that limit who can access remotely and how they access, like they have to use two-factor authentication and 5G, not public Wi-Fi, things like that. Policies about how people use the internet. These are all things that will improve your chance of having some controls over what risks people take. Now, if you outsource parts of your IT, which almost everybody does these days, then you've got a problem, right? Your servers are in, say, a cloud like Azure. That means you can't really touch the hardware, take them down, image the hard drive, and all that jazz. You might not even be able to get at the logs on them. So you might have difficulty getting through to them. Additional costs, you might not have the ability to do what you want to do. So this is what service level agreements are for. If you plan it correctly, you get a contract that specifies what security features you're going to have and what responsiveness you're going to have. Did remote work cause major vulnerabilities? You know, it seems to me like I would say it doesn't. When the pandemic first hit, all these people said there's going to be huge security problems from all these people working from home. But as far as I can tell, there were not. So I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people like me. I was always using my home machine anyway and just carrying it to work and carrying it to conferences and everything, work on my own laptop that just goes with me everywhere. So the security consequences of the pandemic were nothing to me. But I guess the people that actually were driving into an office and using the official company desktop machine were now working from a laptop at home. But I've not heard of any particular problems caused by that. I think I saw one or two incidents where they said they came in through somebody's home network, but no, I didn't notice any big problem, really. It's a good question. Everyone said that would happen, but I didn't notice it. And so if you have a multinational organization, then you've got part of your network in other companies under different laws, so you might not be able to search things there. They might have different privacy laws, and you might not be able to transmit all the data you want to transmit over a large network, although, as we're going to see in the projects in this course, in instant response, the way we're doing it here, you avoid sending a large amount of data around. So, often you want to educate users how to protect their machines. You tell them to avoid phishing, be suspicious of clicking on links, don't turn off the antivirus and stuff like that. Then you have to give them a response. One thing that is extremely common is that there's a security flaw, but the person who notices it, like they do click on a link, they get infected, they don't really know who to tell, they don't know what to do, they don't know if they're going to get fired for telling people. You know, this is the kind of thing that happens if you don't have a clear process. And so, anyway, those are issues which would be handled in user training if you have an organized company policy around these things. Let's take a look at a Kahoot. 3A. All right, maybe that's it. Give it a few more seconds. I guess that's it. All right, so a system administrator feels abused. What term would describe that? That's an exposure. That is a dangerous situation that might lead to trouble. All right. What item increases responsiveness with outsourced IT? Yep, the service level agreement, of course, that would help. Then you would have some specified responsiveness from them. All right, what problem is reduced by educating users? Yep, people installing unauthorized software of any type. Presumably they do less of that if you told them they really weren't allowed to. All right. And what situation might make it difficult to examine log files? Yep, outsourced IT. You may or may not have the ability to view the log files. Like I'm not even supposed to be able to see the log files on my server, although I figured out how to do it anyway, but it was not easy. Anyway. All right, that looks like a real name. And that's not enough of a name to get points. unless they come out of the closet. But that is okay. All right. Well, how did I do it? With a PHP shell. That's usually how I do it. I had to do that for other people who had instant response. If you have a web host, all you have to do is upload a PHP shell, and then you have a shell, and then you can get a command line shell, and then you can wander around in the directories they don't want you going in. That's how I did it. What's funny is they often have a sort of antivirus-like defense. So if you make the simplest possible PHP shell, it will just be deleted, but all you have to do is change a couple of letters in it, and it will go through. That's what I've found. So, but I originally did it because another teacher got hacked, and their website was redirected to a porn site. And they said, "Can you do something?" And I said, "Sure." And I went on there and I said, "Well, they've hidden some files in a directory I can't see. I need a shell." And I said, "Well, how hard would it be to get a shell?" And it wasn't that hard. And once I had a shell, I could get in the other directories, and I found in there the scripts they'd put up that was redirecting the site. I've cleaned up several hacked web servers. It's kind of fun. The things they do are pretty simple. Anyway, almost always PHP, and almost all because they find some way in your PHP software to do an unauthorized upload. And then they have a PHP shell, then they have a command prompt, and then they can put up stuff. It's usually pretty punk stuff, like well, it was fun. You could technically argue about the ethics. You could say that they should have to pay for the next level of service or something to get the shell so I can clean it off. Or you could say that maybe I should pay for their extra $20 a month security package. But, I did it anyway. It didn't seem that dangerous to me. It seemed to me like the kind of, it was the kind of offense like connecting to somebody else's Wi-Fi that's not secured. In some technical sense, you might be technically using a tiny amount of service that you're not entitled to, but in practice, it's not actionable. And this is the thing about legal risk. Everything you do has some legal risk. And I decided the legal risk was small. I had permission from the website owner, but not the website host. So I guess this is why people ask me, is it okay to put up vulnerable servers like I do on public clouds and have students hack them? And I say, well, it certainly does violate the acceptable use policy of the server hosts. They all say not to do that. But if you are careful, you won't get caught. And I realized I'm really no different than all the slobs that sloppily put up out-of-date stuff and get hacked. From their point of view, they can't tell my crappy websites from all the innocent customers' crappy websites. So I'm sort of like hiding in the crowd. But technically, I am doing something they don't really like. And so you ask what the risk is. And the risk is they could kick me off their platform. So I use a special platform for that kind of stuff that is not the one for my main website. And I don't do that stuff on my main website host, because if it were to kick me off, that would be bad. So, and this is what you do. You balance the risks. Anyway, and you consider the exposure. What possible harm could come from this action I'm doing that carries some risk? And then you decide whether it's worth doing it. Anyway, so to prepare your IR team, you got to define your mission. Your mission is typically to respond to incidents in some formal process and quickly. One of the main ways you measure the quality of incident response team is how quickly they will resolve an incident. Typically, when you don't have an incident response team and you're new, the first incident you have, you just run around like an idiot, no clue what to do, and it takes you a long time. And after you get more organized, you get faster and better at it. And what you want to do quickly is figure out what damage has been done and how big an incident it is. That's the scope. Then contain the incident so it stops getting bigger. And then document all the evidence, collect whatever help you need, and then resolve the incident. And you're going to have to consider privacy rights, because if you're imaging software and RAM and databases, you can't just be throwing that data all over the place. You've got to restrict who sees it. And then you have to deal with law enforcement and regulatory agencies that may need to be notified about what you find and what was lost and what you're going to do about it. You do want to maintain confidentiality of the incident. We talked about this last time. You don't just go straight to the papers. You contain it inside your company until you have carefully planned what statement to make from your PR department and your legal team, so you don't just foolishly say something that causes more trouble. And then you may have to go to court and provide testimony and give your management clear recommendations. This is what you want to do. So your legal counsel will want to be included on communications that might have legal consequences, and you may have to put these confidentiality notes on things. Anything you talk over with your lawyer should have this note on it, because then it will not be discoverable in case of lawsuits. Unfi breach earlier this year. Unify? I don't think I know that one. There's been a lot of breaches. Anyway, these confidentiality notes mean that these communications will not be handed over in court as evidence to the other side. And so, when you have, once you're compromised, the attacker typically monitors email on the network. So if you email about your instant response, you'll be exposing things. So you might try encrypting email, although I think most people would just say don't use email at all. Use some alternative thing like a phone app on 5G or 4G using like Telegram or something that you don't normally use. Some completely other service that doesn't pass through your company infrastructure at all would be much wiser than trying to protect something on a compromised network. Anyway, put these labels like you just had on the document. So they're marked as legally protected communications. Watch who's on your conference calls, and keep track of your emails. You're not leaking confidential information in there. There is a source of free email certificates, although now I think the free digital certificates are quite common from Let's Encrypt for any purpose. And when you, like I say, you often have to communicate with external parties like regulatory agencies and law enforcement and stuff. And then you have to be careful. Go through your public relations office. You don't just want to mouth off. You want to have careful statements that don't make things worse for you. And so your IR team has a lot of people have to be updated. You have to update your stakeholders on progress frequently. You have to have reports from a single system within your IR team. Forensic examination and malware analysis and intrusion investigation reports. These are all documents of the various things your teams are doing. By the way, I've heard from several people over the last couple of weeks that they're hiring a lot for malware analysts. I've been teaching malware analysis for several years, but now people are getting to wake up to the fact that you really do need to have a malware analyst on your team. It is no longer an esoteric, exotic skill that only a few specialists have. It's now a fairly common thing that you should have. When you find malware, you should have somebody that knows enough malware analysis to figure out what it does, what it's doing, how to clean it off, how to detect it. Anyway, so there's various incident response programs out there from the big places like SANS and such. And of course, those things are highly respected. You get any chance to get any SANS training or SANS certificates, jump on it. Those things are very highly respected, but they're also very expensive. So you usually don't want to get those unless you find some kind of student discount or your boss is paying for it. So your incident response team, if you're doing real forensics gets very expensive very fast because you image whole hard drives. You need a lot of hard disks and SSDs, and want that stuff to be encrypted. You need a lot of removable media. You need powerful machines with a lot of RAM and fast GPUs and a lot of buses to copy all that stuff. Yeah, the Gidra book is very good. Yeah, exactly. The Gidra book is quite good, and we're using it in the malware analysis class a little bit. Anyway, you usually have a lab if you're serious about this, with all kinds of systems with write blockers and safe to store all the seized hard drives and all that jazz. By the way, you always work on copies of data in the classical forensics. You image the drive, you take the original drive and lock it in the safe. That's evidence, and then you just work from the copy. You don't work on original drives. You don't investigate on them. So you have write blocking kits. These things can cost thousands of dollars. That are just special hardware devices to read data from drives without writing to the drives. And especially for cell phones, they get very complicated. Anyway, large hard drives, cables, power strips, all the computer tools to take apart every kind of computer hardware and get at the things inside. In some other people's forensics classes, I've toured like the FBI's forensic labs, and they just got rooms full of this stuff. And then for network monitoring, you're going to have a network tap on your copying all the packets and then going to a powerful machine to store them all. And this is what's really behind things like the Splunk we're using in this class. The actual hardware to make the database with all that data and keep it up to date is quite considerable. All right. And Security Onion is the free open source equivalent of Splunk, and that uses ELK, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which are the open source products which more or less approximate the functionality of Splunk. Splunk is just a commercial product that makes it much easier to use by making it prettier and nicer. But the fundamental activities can be done with open source project, which is of course true of everything. You can use Linux instead of the Mac or Windows. The only reason you pay for Mac and Windows is convenience. And it's the only reason anybody pays for Splunk. But it turns out that convenience is pretty important. All right, so a lot of people think they have to have Encase because it's the most common forensic software, but you can use any kind of forensic software as long as you're an examiner competent enough to explain it in court and be convincing. But most examiners are not really that technically strong, so instead of actually understanding how their tools work and being able to defend it with clearly explained details in court, they use a commercial tool and then they rely on the reputation of the commercial tool. And this is the point. The real evidence in court is the human talking. It is not the gadget or the scientific technique. This is the Daubert standard. Has this technique been passed through these various standards? And this is why certain things are acceptable in court, like fingerprints, and other things like those lie detectors. Forget the fancy name of those things. These lie detectors are not acceptable in court because they have failed these scientific tests. All right, and so here's other tests for it. Has the technique been created? Does the expert have enough data? And so on. And we will ask you about your credentials. The people I know that were expert witnesses have a resume like 30 pages long that lists every talk you ever gave, every article you ever published, a jig-thick wad of proof that you're an authority in the field, that sort of thing. So you use boot disks with a special Linux-based software sometimes if you like using Linux. You have to have all sorts of software and disk imaging tools and memory capture tools. And you'll be doing all this stuff if you take the 121 class. Not so much in this class. In this class, we're going to use primarily Splunk and Velociraptor, which do not make full disk images or full memory images. Instead, they ask careful questions and get small amounts of data from systems to make it faster and easier. More targeted collection. All right, so live response. This is what we're going to do. Live response, where you run a script that asks certain questions of the system and records the answers instead of just collecting all the hard drive or all the RAM. And you create indicators and search for them. There are forensic examination suites used if you get a whole hard drive image like FTK or SleuthKit or Encase. And we'll be using log analysis tools a lot, which is what Splunk is. So for our live response, we're going to use Velociraptor, which is fantastic, and it made this course a whole lot easier. I used to go into a lot more detail of exactly how a lot of these things work, but in Velociraptor, it's all built in, and you can just sort of point and click and use it. It's really nice. And Splunk, of course, is the main one we're going to use for log analysis, which you're already doing now. A great way to analyze logs from many systems quickly and make it much easier to analyze them. Anyway, you have evidence handling. If you do collect evidence and you plan on going to court, then you have to save the evidence. This is the hard drive. This is the laptop that was used, locked in a safe so you can take it to court. This is the thing. And if you gather evidence from it, you have to package it up in a file and mark it with a hash value so that you can then make another copy of it for the other side in the court. So they can say, here's the evidence, consists of this file with this hash value, and the other side has the same file with the same hash value, so their examiner can also examine it and decide whether they believe our conclusions. So you have these change of custody evidence marking any kind of physical hardware you grab, like laptops or thumb drives or cameras or whatever you find. And there's specifications from, respected government agencies, Department of Justice, showing the rules on this. And they're pretty obvious, stick it in a container that blocks radio, lock it up so nobody can get in who isn't authorized, protect it, and all that jazz. Take a copy, put it on a drive that was blank first, that sort of thing. All right, and you're going to have an internal knowledge repository recording all your incidents. this is really important at your company. You have your own book of, it's a file like a wiki on your system of all the incidents and what you did and who did what, because it's very likely that future incidents will be related to the past ones and your procedures will be based on your past procedures. So this is how you manage to have a well-defined team that gets better and better. The same thing's true, by the way, of our competition teams. They're getting more organized about this, having a clear record of what they did this year so the whole team can study that and get better next year. I think football teams do the same thing. Any kind of team that wants to make sure you're getting better will have some way of preserving the knowledge you gained this time to be used next time. All right, there's another Kahoot. This is going to be 3B. All right, looks like that's it. Oh, maybe not. Okay. All right. All right, which one of these is network monitoring software? Security Onion. All right. All right, which one protects data on a stolen laptop? That's full disk encryption, like Microsoft BitLocker. That's the point. If somebody steals your laptop, but it's encrypted, then you don't have to report that as a breach because they can't get the data. All they get is the hardware. All right. Which one prevents an email from being discoverable? Yeah, that's it, a privileged label. Everybody got it wrong, pardon me. SMIME just encrypts email. That doesn't, discoverable does not mean an eavesdropper can read it, which is what you're thinking of. Discoverable means it has to be submitted to the other side when you get sued in the process called discovery. It is a legal risk, and the privileged label is what means you do not have to submit this in the process of discovery. All right. Yeah, to get the free Ghidra, you can go to my page. Here, let me just, I see the question. This is a useful page. If you go to my page, this is the page for this class. At the top, you'll see how to get free textbooks right here. So I'll put it here. At the top of this page, it explains how to get free textbooks. And if you have a City College email address, a whole bunch of books are free through this Safari Online. And apparently the Ghidra book is there too. Good. I'm glad you asked that question. That's an important thing for people to know, how to get a free textbook. Sure. All right. And what item will collect information about running processes? Okay, RAM, it's in the RAM. That's what you get from RAM capture. All right. All right, another person will have to come out of the closet if they want their points. And Clayton, I think that's a real name. And that's a real name, good. All right. All right. So let's get, I think we can go ahead with this. All right. So the infrastructure for instant response. You have your computing devices, things like asset management may be an issue where you should know what hardware you have and where it is, and your network. There are ways to design your network to make it more secure and easier to segment and limit risks. All right. Yeah, I don't know what that Safari Online thing is. I think it might be associated with the library, but whatever it is pretty great that we have access to all those books. Anyway, there are certain systems you use all the time, and you keep them up to date, but there are little systems on the side that you've sort of forgotten about and abandoned, and those are often the way in because they tend to be out of date and not monitored. So one thing that's important at companies that get more mature about security is they audit their stuff. They review all their devices, find out what are they still in use, who's maintaining them, who's updating them, and all that jazz. Are they being logged, and protected properly? This is a real important issue. Colleges are terrible for this. Colleges tend to be big, sprawling organizations without much control, and people set up things from little projects and then forget about it. So colleges typically have a bunch of these abandoned running systems, but you don't want that. It's not a good security policy. So there are online guides you can get for specifications for all different kinds of devices. Microsoft publishes a lot of them, and other agencies saying what the recommended settings are for an email server or a file server, domain controller, or whatever you've got. And so you should be recording what you have, who's in charge of it, what it's for, how the network is set up, and all that jazz. And perform a survey, recording what operating system, what security software, what applications are on there. You should, on other things, you have to know that to pay for the licenses for your proprietary software. And attackers will typically get in and compromise a system, and then they will steal the passwords from that system by dumping the hashes or breaking into a database or various techniques. And there are service accounts. Now, the normal passwords you think of are the passwords of people who log in and type a password to get access to a system. But in the background, there are system-to-system automatic processes doing things like sending email from one system to another and other signals. And those have passwords too, those systems accounts. And that's the way a lot of attackers like to get in, is by using those backdoor system accounts with passwords that nobody thinks of and almost nobody ever changes. And so that's an issue. Those are called the service accounts. And you can see the services on your machine running in the background with services in Microsoft Windows. And some of these have logon as a service right, and some of them have network connections to services on other servers, which they're connecting to with some credentials. All right. So I mentioned software metering is how you keep track of how much software you're using so you can pay for enough licenses. Performance monitoring. Make sure that all your stuff is running well enough. I recently had to prepare a lecture for a contractor where I was going through all the Azure performance monitoring, and it is amazing. Azure has got tons and tons of stuff that will record how many people are using your web server, what page they're clicking on, how many people are using your mobile app, all the things about how each server you're using is running, so you can have a performance dashboard and know what's going on, what part of the app is not working, which users are having errors, and all that jazz. And some people freak out and say that is intrusive spying on people, and you could look at it that way, but you could also say it's just trying to make my system work. I'm measuring to see, how many of my customers are getting good experiences and how many customers are giving up and leaving before they buy something because apparently the website is not working. You can really do all that. It's quite a chore, but that's what big real enterprises do, is seriously monitor the performance of the services they offer. And of course, you've got firewalls and error logs and centralized logging like we've been talking about with Splunk. So I mentioned Elk, Elasticstash, Logstash, and Kibana. There's other ones, ELSA and Snare, free systems, and there's commercial ones like Splunk, ArcSight, and Envision, which you can sometimes buy a special hardware device for it. Splunk will let you put it in their cloud, so you don't even have to have any hardware at all, or you do it all with software in your own servers, depending on which system you get and how you set it up. You retain your logs for some period of time. PCI DSS, if you're taking payment cards, they require you to retain it for a year. You may choose a different period if you're not taking payment cards. On Windows, you should be recording authentication, log on and log off, process creation and termination, user management. You should have large event logs, and you should forward them all to a centralized logging system. What we're going to do in the projects is we're going to use the Sysmon software from Microsoft that makes it very easy to grab these logs and forward them to another server. On Unix, it's very similar. Keep track of process accounting and forward all the logs to a central logging system. On Unix, it is the original syslog. That's what syslog has always been designed for, is to record things and to easily forward them over the network to a central server. From applications, you've got all your application servers, all your network services like DHCP. You log DNS queries, which is extremely useful. One thing that's happened over the last 5 years is more and more people have started switching to DNS over HTTPS, and a lot of people have got real upset about that because logging DNS was a very valuable security feature. So you may wish to disallow DO at your enterprise and force people to use your DNS server so you can log that DNS. That is an option. If you don't, you're going to lose some of the valuable logging options. So you got antivirus on the networks, which on your endpoints, which will detect things. By default, it will usually delete malware, but you don't want that. What you want it to do is quarantine the malware, because you might want to get a sample of that malware and examine it instead of having it just vanish. And don't transmit suspicious files to a vendor because they might include confidential data. All right, and so there's tools that can search your environment for artifacts, and we're going to use the free new tool, Velociraptor, but the older commercial tools were Access Data Enterprise, Encase Enterprise, and these other ones. Even homegrown scripts like Python scripts and batch scripts and WMI commands are another way to do it. All this is replaced by Velociraptor, thank God. It was not much fun to have to write your own script for this stuff. And so you should have a patching solution to make sure everything gets patched. Two-factor authentication is good, limiting who has access, high privilege access rights, firewalls and AV, decommissioning end-of-life systems. An application whitelisting is extremely powerful, although administratively a burden, where you only let known good applications run, and you have to constantly keep that list of known good applications updated, but then nobody can run anything strange, and that's a good thing. Well, Velociraptor just check for IOCs. You can use it, as far as I know, only for checking for IOCs. For log forwarding, you use Splunk and the Splunk Universal Forwarding Engine, or these other alternative solutions. It's a very good question. Velociraptor does not look at logs. You can ask it to harvest the event logs, but it does not give you the logs in a handy way the way Splunk does. It's the alternative thing. Good, I'm glad you're asking. Yeah, there's complementary products, but they really don't overlap much in functionality. All right. Anyway, so you have network segmentation. If you have a lot of servers like engineering and sales and support and web services and finance, instead of just having one flat network where everything is connected to the same switch, you break it up with firewalls. So the finance is separate from the web and separate from the sales. And then if somebody in sales gets infected, it might stay only contained to the sales network and not get over to the finance. That sort of thing. This is network segmentation and access control, which is extremely useful to help prevent attackers from getting too far and containing the attacks once you find them, and so on. All right. So you can filter traffic at multiple levels. You can have proxies. And if you don't have two-factor authentication everywhere, you should at least have it when you cross major trust boundaries. Microsoft remote procedure calls are necessary for domain controllers and Microsoft file sharing, but they're too dangerous to expose to the public internet. So, because you can launch processes with PsExec, another Microsoft tool. So you generally block all these ports at your firewall. You do not let external people connect to any of these ports. If anybody outside your company needs to connect to this, you make them come in with a VPN first, proving they're actually a company employee, and then they can connect these things. You don't just let people on the internet reach these ports because the services are too sensitive and too vulnerable. So it's just more detail how you'd set up your finance department. I'm not going to worry about it. All right, so you control the traffic between zones, and you don't let servers send outbound traffic to the internet. We talked about that a couple times ago with the Splunk work. That was one way to detect suspicious traffic, was when the web server was making HTTP requests out to the internet. That's backwards and should not be allowed. And administrators should be using two-factor authentication to a specified workstation to put files on the web server. They shouldn't just be downloading stuff directly from the internet right onto the web server. And your workstations should be in segments and not allowed to reach the other segments directly, so that if they get infected, the infection can't easily spread to another segment. And you can have black holes. You will have some addresses that belong to your company, like maybe a whole class C, and you're not using them all. So you take the addresses that are not used, and instead of just throwing away packets sent to them, send it someplace to record that somebody is attacking us. They're sending packets to addresses we're not using, so that must be an attacker scanning the network. That can't be a legitimate customer trying to get work done. All right. Honeypots, some people talk about this, adding deliberately vulnerable systems in the hopes of catching attackers. Most people in the business, I regard this as a waste of your time. Unless you are like an antivirus company trying to catch attacks and log them or something, you'd probably be a lot better off focusing on doing simple things to defend your assets, like really make sure you got rid of all the default passwords and so on. Isn't there a way to block external people from using the PsExec query? Yes, I'm sure you could use an IDS or something, but in general, there have been so many attacks through those ports that it's considered a really bad idea to expose them to the internet anyway. But yes, there are certainly other ways. And by the way, employing many types of defenses is defense in depth and highly encouraged, because none of your defenses are perfect. So it would be a good idea to block the ports and have those other defenses still watching people who's using PsExec on your network anyway. So you have documentation, network diagrams, and network monitoring devices. And all the configurations should be recorded so you can see if somebody's changing the configuration. This is fairly common, that people get in, then they change the configuration on a proxy server or a firewall to give themselves more network access than they're supposed to have. So you got firewalls, IDSs, capture systems, capturing all the packets from a tap. You got Nettlow. Nettlow records general information about communications. Doesn't record every packet. It says this IP went to that IP on this port for this period of time. Just a record of, what total calls were made, and that's less perfect, but it's easier to scan through for connections. It's like NetStat gives you this list. Proxy servers to restrict connections to the internet. And, DNS and DHCP should be logged extensively. If you use dynamic addresses, like almost everybody does, you need to log them. Otherwise, if you find a historical record from a week ago of something bad happening on an IP address, you won't have any way to figure out who that was. So, all right. So let's take a look at the last Kahoot, which is somewhere here. Nope, it's not there. Where is it? Oh, here, back here. Okay. 3C. What's the title of this talk? This is called, I think, Preparing for an Incident, something like that. This is Chapter 3. And If I can find a browser that's not in use, I'll send you the link. There. Okay, this is the page for the class. And the particular one we're doing is this one, 3 pre-incident preparation. Good. Everybody's welcome. I'm sure we get some people wandering through who are not in the class, which is fine. All right, I think maybe I got everybody that's coming. Okay, so which password is difficult to change? Okay, that's service accounts, making background connections with no actual human running them. All right, which one of these would destroy evidence? Antivirus. Now, of course, if antivirus was perfect and it identified something and logged it and deleted it, that would be fine, but antivirus is very far from perfect. Lord, I know. All my page keeps getting flagged by antivirus. So just because antivirus tells you this is a Trojan of some type, that's not really complete or accurate information. You really want the sample of that malware to analyze it to find out what it really does. So you don't want your antivirus just deleting things that it detects. All right, what log is essential to identify systems? All right, those are DHCP logs. Keep track of which IP address was assigned to which MAC address, so you can find out which machine held in that IP address. All right, and what's the dangerous Microsoft feature? Remote procedure calls are at the heart of a great many serious malware outbreaks. It's a powerful Microsoft technology that is quite dangerous. All right, what item reduces the risk from stolen passwords? Yeah, that's the two-factor authentication, one of the major things you do to improve security. So you need not only the password, but something else like an app on your phone. So if somebody steals a database of 1 million passwords, it doesn't really do them much good, unless they can somehow steal the other factor as well. All right. There's a real name. Oh, he's up here. Good. That's Keegan has won 3 times. Very good. All right, and I got Ray. All right, so many of these people, I don't know who they are, so you won't get points unless you tell me. But anyway, you may not care. All right, so I'm going to stop this recording.